It was a national summit, a stage full of the most powerful people in the country. My son, a man who had abandoned me when I was sick, watched from the audience. He thought he had outrun his past, but he was about to witness a moment that would change everything. The painting that exposed his betrayal became a symbol of a generation. And my story, once a private tragedy, was about to become a powerful public triumph. What happened next on that stage was a shocking, emotional climax that no one saw coming. It was the summer of '77, a sweltering July afternoon, and the air in our small town of Harmony, Ohio, hung thick with the promise of a thunderstorm. I remember the scent of freshly mown grass, mixed with the faint metallic tang of an approaching downpour. My name is Virginia Lee, and I was just a few months shy of my 62nd birthday. I sat by the window in my humble living room, a worn apron tied around my waist, meticulously darning a sock, a habit from my mother's generation. The radio, a sturdy wooden Zenith, softly played a tune by Fleetwood Mac. Dreams was the song, I recall. I always loved how Stevie Nicks' voice seemed to carry all the longing and hope of a woman's heart. But that day, my heart felt less like a dream and more like a heavy stone. The doctor had given me the news just that morning, hushed and somber, about a spot on my lung. Cancer. The word hung in the air like a shroud, chilling me despite the summer heat. My husband had passed away 3 years prior, and my only son, Thomas, was my rock. He was a successful real estate agent in Cincinnati with a beautiful wife, Linda, and 2 young children. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling slightly, and dialed his number. The line rang twice before his crisp, professional voice answered. "Hello, this is Thomas Vance. How can I help you?" "Thomas, it's Mom. I have something I need to tell you." There was a slight pause, a moment of annoyance I knew too well. "Mom, can this wait? I'm right in the middle of closing a big deal, a very big deal." "No, son, it can't," I insisted, my voice gaining a bit of strength. "I went to the doctor today. They found something." Another pause, this time longer. I could almost hear his sigh. "Mom, you know I get worried about these things. What did they say? Is it serious?" "They said it's serious," and a tear slid down my cheek. "They want me to start treatment right away. It's cancer, Thomas." The phone went silent. I waited, listening to the static on the line, my heart pounding in my ears. I expected him to rush home and tell me he'd take care of everything. That's what a son does, right? But what came next was something I'll never forget. His voice, when he finally spoke, was cold and distant, devoid of any warmth. "Mom, I'm so sorry to hear that. I really am. But Linda and I just can't handle this right now. You know how stressful my job is. And the kids, they need us. I'm sure you'll be fine. You're a strong woman. You always have been." He was telling me he was too busy to be there for me. Too busy for his own mother. I felt a surge of indignation mixed with the deep ache of betrayal. After all the years I spent raising him, making sure he had everything he needed to succeed, he was turning his back on me. The very moment I needed him the most, he was nowhere to be found. And that's when I knew the dream I had of my son and I was a complete fabrication. He wasn't the loving, kind boy I had raised. He was a stranger. I wanted to scream, to tell him how utterly selfish he was, but I didn't. I just quietly said, "I understand, Thomas." But I didn't, not even a little. How could he just throw me away like that? It was a cruelty that no mother should have to face, and the unfairness of it all was a poison that seeped into my soul. I hung up the phone, the world feeling suddenly colder and darker, like that promised storm had finally arrived, but only for me. I was alone, and the worst part was, I was right where I had been my entire life, standing on my 2 feet. Now, I have to figure out how to get through this, and maybe you can help me. It was after I hung up the phone that I truly felt the full crushing weight of my diagnosis. The cancer, the betrayal, it all hit me at once. I remember sitting there for what felt like hours, staring out the window at the graying sky. The storm was coming, and I felt as if it were gathering right inside my chest. I had always been the one to take care of things, the one to pick up the pieces, whether it was a broken teacup or a broken heart, but who would pick up mine? My son, my only child, had just told me I was a problem he couldn't afford to deal with. A strange kind of clarity settled over me, a bitter sort of peace. I was on my own. It was a cold, hard fact, but it was also a kind of freedom. No one to disappoint, no one to live for but myself. It was an unsettling thought for a woman who had spent her life putting others first, but it was also undeniably liberating. The radio played on, a soft hum in the background, but my mind was a whirlwind. I started to think about what the doctors had said, about the options I had. They all sounded so clinical, so sterile, so expensive. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of chamomile tea, just as my mother used to do when I was upset. The familiar ritual was a small comfort. As I sat there, sipping the warm liquid, I caught sight of a stack of old magazines on the counter. Life magazine, the Saturday Evening Post. I had bought them at a garage sale a few weeks ago just for something to read. I picked up one, a Life magazine from the spring of 1977, and started flipping through it. My eyes fell on an article about local artists, a small piece about a woman named Margaret Anderson, a painter from a small town in Pennsylvania who had started painting after her husband passed away. Her work was vibrant, full of life and color, a sharp contrast to the black and white of the paper. I felt a pang of longing. I had always loved to draw, to sketch, to create, but life had gotten in the way. Marriage, motherhood, a husband's career, and a son's future, my own passions were always on the back burner. Now, with a diagnosis hanging over my head, I felt an urgency, a fire that I hadn't felt in years. If my time was limited, what was I waiting for? What was the point of holding on to things that no longer served me? And what did I truly have to lose? My son had already left me. I was facing this alone anyway. That night, I went to the old shed behind my house. It was full of my husband's old tools, a lifetime of dust and cobwebs, and in a forgotten corner, a box of my old sketchbooks and a half-empty set of oil paints. I blew the dust off the lid, the smell of turpentine and linseed oil filling the air, a scent that I hadn't smelled in decades. I opened the box and saw my brushes stiff with dried paint. My fingers traced the outline of a half-finished landscape I had started years ago. The world outside my little shed was dark, the storm finally breaking, rain lashing against the tin roof, but inside, a tiny spark had been ignited, a quiet rebellion against the hand I had been dealt. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know if I would even have the strength to lift a paintbrush in a week, a month, or a year. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this cancer or my son's abandonment be the last chapter of my story. I was going to live, truly live, for the time I had left. I was going to paint. I was going to show them. I was going to show them all. That feeling of determination, that was my only hope. It was a strange mix of anger and defiance and pure unadulterated resolve. I didn't know it then, but this was the first step on a journey I never expected to take, a journey that would take me from a small Ohio town to the front page of a newspaper. And my son, he would not see it coming. This feeling of not knowing what was going to happen next, that was what drove me. It was what gave me hope. I could fall apart, or I could become something more than what I was. I just wasn't sure what that something was yet. For the next few weeks, I was consumed by a world of color and form that I hadn't touched in decades. My dusty old shed became my sanctuary, my escape. I found myself spending hours there, forgetting about the diagnosis, forgetting about Thomas. I was a woman on a mission. I started small, with a still life of some apples from my kitchen, but quickly moved to landscapes, inspired by the rolling hills and dense forests of my home state. I worked with a furious energy, as if I could outrun the inevitable. Every brushstroke was a defiance, a way of telling the universe that I wasn't done yet. My friends, bless their hearts, would call to check on me, offering to bring casseroles or just sit with me.
But I always politely declined, making up excuses about being busy. How could I explain that I was too busy painting a sunset to talk about my cancer? It sounded absurd even to me. So I kept my newfound passion to myself, a private rebellion that was mine and mine alone. I sold a few pieces at a local art fair, and to my surprise, they sold out almost instantly. The money wasn't much, but it was enough to buy more paint, more canvas, and a little more time in my sanctuary. Then came the day I had to call Thomas. The doctors had scheduled my first round of treatment, and I needed to get my affairs in order. I hated making the call, my hand hovering over the phone for what seemed like an eternity. When he answered, I was surprised to hear a cheerfulness in his voice. "Mom, I'm so glad you called. Linda and I were just talking about you. We were just saying how you must be doing so much better. We haven't heard from you in a while." A wave of bitterness washed over me. "I'm not better, Thomas. I'm starting treatment next week. I need you to come to the house. I have some documents I need you to look over." His cheerfulness evaporated instantly. "Mom, I can't. I have a huge deal closing, and Linda is planning a trip to the Poconos with the kids. We just don't have time." "Thomas," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage, "I am asking you, as your mother, to come home. I need your help. I'm sick." "I know, Mom," he said, his voice flat, "but I have to put my family first. You understand, don't you?" My heart sank. He had always been my boy, but he had become a stranger. He didn't see me as a person, as his mother, but as a burden. He was so consumed by his own ambition, his own life, that he couldn't see the pain he was inflicting. It was an emotional and moral betrayal, a twisting of the very idea of what family and duty were supposed to mean. I felt the injustice of it all in my bones. Here I was facing a fight for my life, and my son, the person I had raised to be a good man, was treating me like a business expense? "I understand," I said again, but this time it was a lie. I didn't understand. I never would. He was a complete mystery to me, this boy I had spent every waking moment of my life for. I hung up the phone, the receiver feeling heavy in my hand. I felt defeated, hollowed out. But then my eyes fell on a canvas I had just started, a vibrant portrait of a young woman with a determined look in her eyes. It was me, years ago, but also me now, the woman I was becoming, a woman who in the face of emotional abandonment chose to fight, a woman who in the face of being reduced to nothing had found something new to live for. The unfairness of it all was a poison, but the paint was my antidote. The brushstrokes were my voice, and my story was just beginning. You won't believe what happened next. The very thing Thomas told me he was too busy to handle turned out to be the key to everything. You don't want to miss how this story unfolds.
The day after my son's call, I took a hard look at myself in the mirror. My hair was a mess, my eyes were sunken, and a lifetime of worries seemed to have etched themselves onto my face. I looked exactly as a woman who had just been abandoned by her son should look. But something shifted. A different kind of fire lit up in my eyes. Not one of sorrow, but of defiance. The world was telling me to give up, to wither away, but I had no intention of doing so. My art was my rebellion, my way of saying, I am still here. The shed became my haven, a place where the rules of the world didn't apply. I spent my mornings with a brush in my hand, my afternoons with doctors, and my evenings with a newfound determination. I was still weak, still tired, but with every passing day, the canvases filling my shed gave me a little more strength. My first breakthrough came a week later. The local community center was hosting its annual art show, and I, on a whim that felt more like a command from within, decided to submit a piece. It was a portrait of my late husband, done in a style that was both realistic and emotionally raw. I had captured not just his likeness, but the kind and gentle spirit that had always been his essence. The organizers, a pair of well-meaning but somewhat pretentious women named Brenda and Carol, looked at my painting with a polite skepticism that almost made me laugh out loud. I knew what they were thinking. Another amateur,
a little old lady who paints for fun. They placed my painting in a corner, behind a massive abstract sculpture made of what looked like salvaged metal. I was just happy to be there, to have my work on display. The day of the show was a blur of polite nods and forced smiles. I saw a few people glance at my painting, but no one lingered. No one seemed to see it. My heart sank a little, but I told myself it didn't matter. This wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about, well, it was about me. About proving to myself that I was more than just a sickness, more than just a forgotten mother. As I was about to leave, defeated, a man with a graying beard and kind eyes stopped in front of my painting. He looked at it for a long, long time. I was about to walk away when he turned to me. "Ma'am, this is an incredible piece of work. The emotion, it's just powerful. Who is he?" I felt a warmth spread through my chest. "He was my husband," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "He passed away a few years ago." The man's eyes softened. "I'm so sorry, but you've captured something truly special here. You're a real artist." He introduced himself as Arthur, an art critic for a small, local newspaper. He asked me if I had more work, and I, on a rare moment of bravado, invited him to my home. He seemed genuinely intrigued. I wasn't expecting anything to come of it, but it was a small victory nonetheless, a little ray of sunshine in the perpetual storm cloud of my life. I spent the next few days in a fever of creativity, painting with a passion I hadn't known was in me. Arthur came to my house a few days later, and when he stepped into my shed, his eyes went wide. He didn't say a word, just walked from canvas to canvas, his face a mix of awe and disbelief. I had everything in there: landscapes, portraits, abstract pieces I had painted when I was just trying to get the hang of things again. He spent nearly 2 hours in there, asking me questions about my technique, my inspiration, my life. I told him everything, about my husband, about my son, about the diagnosis. The words tumbled out of me, a flood of emotions I had been holding back for months. He listened patiently, his face a mask of compassion. He said, "Virginia, your work is more than just good. It's important. It's a story. You've captured the heart and soul of a generation. Your paintings, they're not just beautiful. They're honest. They're real. People need to see this." I felt a tear slide down my cheek. For the first time in months, I felt truly seen. Not as a sick woman, not as a lonely old lady, but as an artist, an individual, a person. Arthur promised to write a piece about me for his newspaper. I was so grateful, so humbled. I never imagined my art would be worth more than a few $100s. I never imagined it would be worth anything at all. The very next day, a package arrived from Thomas. A card and a check. "For your treatments, Mom. Sorry I can't be there. Love, Thomas." The check was for a significant amount, enough to cover a few months of my treatments. I should have been grateful, but I felt nothing but a cold, hard rage. It was a transaction, not an act of love. He was paying me to stay away, to be his problem from afar. The money was a symbol of his abandonment, a hollow gesture that only solidified my determination to do this on my terms. His way wasn't going to be my way. I was going to fight this battle on my own terms. My son might have forgotten me, but the world was about to remember. I know what you're thinking. A small article in a local paper, what could that really do? But what happened next? What he wrote about my art, about my life, it changed everything. I can't even believe it myself. You'll have to keep reading to see what my son did after his so-called act of kindness went horribly publicly wrong. You don't want to miss a single moment of this. Trust me.
The article, when it came out, was nothing short of a miracle. Arthur, the art critic, didn't just write a review. He wrote a tribute. His words were a mirror, reflecting my life back to me in a way I had never seen before. He wrote about the woman who had put her dreams on hold for her family, only to find them again in the face of a terrifying illness. He wrote about the rawness of my art, the way it captured the very soul of a person and a time. He called my painting of my husband a masterpiece of emotional honesty, and my landscapes a defiant shout of life in the face of a storm. The article was titled, "The Heart of Harmony, A Painter's Triumph Over Tragedy." The newspaper wasn't a national one, but in a small town like Harmony, it might as well have been. Suddenly, my phone was ringing off the hook. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers I'd never met were calling to congratulate me. They weren't calling to ask how my treatment was going or to offer help with my sickness. They were calling to talk about my art. My humble little shed became the most talked about place in town. People started showing up on my doorstep, asking to see my work. They came with teary eyes, telling me my painting of my husband reminded them of their own loved ones. I was no longer just the grieving widow or the sick old woman. I was an artist. I was Virginia Lee. My son's check, the one he had sent to buy his way out of his obligation, sat on my kitchen table, untouched. It felt like a small, insignificant thing now. My art had given me something money never could: a voice, a purpose, a reason to keep going. The story spread like wildfire, picked up by bigger regional newspapers. A gallery owner from Columbus, a sophisticated woman with an eye for talent, called me and asked to represent my work. She was amazed that I had painted so much in such a short time, not knowing the furious, desperate energy that had fueled me. She organized a one-woman show for me at her gallery, a prospect that terrified me and thrilled me in equal measure. I was going to be a real artist with my own show, just like in the magazines. It was a dream I hadn't even known I had. My life was finally starting to feel full, vibrant, and whole again. I was fighting my sickness, but I was also fighting for my life, and my art was my weapon. I was so busy, I barely had time to think about Thomas, but he was always there in the back of my mind. The betrayal was still a wound, but it was slowly, surely healing. My life was finally becoming my own. I thought my son would be happy for me, proud of me, finally understand what I had been through. I had no idea that my newfound success would be the very thing that would turn his so-called kindness into a public scandal. You just won't believe what he did next. The climax is just around the corner. Are you ready for it?
The day the article was published, I received a phone call. It wasn't from a friend, a neighbor, or even the gallery owner. It was from Thomas. I almost didn't answer, but a bitter curiosity got the better of me. "Mom, I just saw the newspaper," he said, his voice a strange mix of forced cheerfulness and something I couldn't quite place. "Congratulations! That's wonderful news. I always knew you had a talent." The hypocrisy was so thick I could almost taste it. He had abandoned me when I was at my lowest, and now when he saw my name in the paper, he wanted to claim a piece of my success. The sheer audacity of it all was breathtaking. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that his congratulations were empty, that his kindness was too little too late. But I didn't. I just listened, a cold fury building inside me. He went on, talking about my art as if he had been a supporter all along, as if he had been there for me through my diagnosis. He asked if he could use my paintings to decorate his new office, to show them off to his clients. He said it would be great exposure for me. And for you, I thought bitterly, but I said nothing. I just listened, my heart a hard, cold knot in my chest. He was so consumed by his own ambition, by his own need to project an image of success, that he didn't even see the pain he was causing. He was a product of his world, a world where relationships were transactional, where people were just stepping stones to a higher social status. I felt a pang of sorrow for the boy he once was, the boy who had once looked at me with unconditional love. But that boy was long gone, replaced by a stranger. I told him I would think about it, a non-committal response that I knew would infuriate him.
He was not used to being denied. He was a man who was used to getting what he wanted, a man who believed that everything, even his own mother's love, had a price. He ended the call with a rushed, "Talk to you soon, Mom," and I was left with the bitter taste of his words. I hung up the phone and walked to my shed, my sanctuary. I had to paint to let the emotions out. I painted with a frantic energy, with a fury that surprised even me. I painted the betrayal, the abandonment, the coldness of his voice. I painted a portrait of a mother with a broken heart, her eyes filled with sorrow and rage. It was a raw, honest piece, and when I was done, I felt a sense of release. My show in Columbus was a huge success. The gallery was packed, and people were buzzing about my work. I was a sensation, a local celebrity. I sold every single piece. The money was more than I had ever dreamed of, enough to cover my medical bills for years to come. I didn't need Thomas's money anymore. His check was still on my kitchen table, a mocking reminder of his hollow gesture. I decided to use the money from my show to pay for my treatments, to show him that I didn't need him, that I could do this on my own. I was going to fight this battle on my own terms. My son might have forgotten me, but the world was about to remember. That's when he called again. His tone was different this time, not cheerful, but desperate. "Mom, I need you to do me a favor." He skipped the pleasantries. "My boss is having a charity gala, and he wants me to bring a piece of your work. It's for a very important client, a big collector. It could be a huge opportunity for me." He didn't ask. He demanded. He had no shame, no guilt. He saw me as a means to an end, a tool to climb the corporate ladder. I felt a wave of nausea. He was not just using me, he was exploiting me. He was turning my triumph into a stepping stone for his own ambition. The unfairness of it all was a poison that seeped into my soul. I felt the injustice of it all in my bones. But then a wicked thought came to me, a mischievous, almost sarcastic idea. I could use this. I could turn his game on him. He wanted a piece of my art. I would give him one. A piece that would tell the truth, a piece that would expose his betrayal. I felt a rush of adrenaline. I was not just an artist. I was a storyteller, and my next painting would be my greatest story yet. He thought he could use me, but he had no idea that I was about to use him. I felt a sense of power I hadn't felt in years, a sense of control over my own destiny. The battle was no longer just about my health. It was about my honor, my dignity. It was about showing him and the world who I really was. I was not a victim. I was a warrior. I thought my son would be happy for me, proud of me, finally understand what I had been through. I had no idea that my newfound success would be the very thing that would turn his so-called kindness into a public scandal. The days that followed were a blur of frenetic energy. I stopped by the local art supply store and bought the biggest canvas I could find, so big it barely fit through the door of my shed. I worked like a madwoman, painting for 12, sometimes 15 hours a day, fueled by black coffee and the fire in my soul. I was on a mission, a holy quest to paint the most powerful, most honest piece of my life. I called it The Prodigal Son. The irony was not lost on me. I painted Thomas as I saw him now, a man in an expensive suit, his face a mask of false sincerity, his eyes a cold, calculating blue. I painted the check he had sent me, a mocking piece of paper fluttering in a harsh, cold wind. I painted myself, not as a frail, sick woman, but as a warrior in a garden of thorns, a lone figure standing tall against a storm. My skin was thin and pale, but my eyes were ablaze with a fiery defiance. The canvas was a war zone of emotion, a battleground where a mother's love and a son's betrayal fought for dominance. I poured all my grief, all my anger, and all my newfound strength into that painting. I didn't care about the money or the fame anymore. This was my legacy. This was my truth.
When the painting was finished, I stepped back and looked at it, and a shudder ran through me. It was raw, honest, and terrifying. It was the truth, laid bare for all to see. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that Thomas would hate it. He would be furious. But I didn't care. The painting was my revenge, my justice. It was my way of taking back my power, of refusing to be his victim. I felt a sense of vindication that was more satisfying than any amount of money. He called me a week before the gala. "Mom," he said, his voice dripping with faux charm, "is the painting ready? My boss is so excited to see it. It's going to be the centerpiece of the whole event." I told him it was ready. "It's called The Prodigal Son," I said, a faint smile playing on my lips. "I think you'll find it very expressive." He laughed, a short, nervous sound. "Expressive, huh? Well, that sounds great, Mom. Just what we need. Something with a lot of emotion." He had no idea. He thought I was painting a sentimental piece, a tribute to him. He was so blinded by his own arrogance that he couldn't see the trap I had laid for him. The painting was more than just a piece of art. It was a bomb, and I was about to light the fuse. He sent a man to pick up the painting, a young, eager assistant who was so impressed by my work that he could barely speak. He didn't know the story behind the canvas, but he could feel the power in it. He looked at me with a mix of awe and reverence, and I felt a sense of pride that had nothing to do with fame or money. I was an artist. I was a person with a story to tell, and my story was about to be heard. The night of the gala, I sat at home listening to the radio, a cup of tea in my hand. I imagined Thomas standing there, a big smile on his face, introducing his mother's painting to his boss. I imagined the moment when the lights would come on and the crowd would see the prodigal son. I imagined the look on his face when he realized what I had done. It was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I had been fighting for, the moment of truth. I had no idea that my painting would not only expose my son's betrayal, but would also become a symbol of something so much bigger, something that would turn my small-town life into a national sensation. The day after the gala felt different. The air and harmony seemed to hum with a new kind of energy. I hadn't heard from Thomas, which was, in its own way, the loudest silence of all. I could only imagine the scene at the gala. The moment the spotlight hit my painting, The Prodigal Son, the murmurs turning to whispers, the whispers to a stunned silence. His colleagues, his boss, his wife, all of them seeing not a masterpiece, but a confession. I pictured the look on his face, the realization that his carefully constructed facade of a loving, successful son was crumbling before his very eyes. The cold rage he must have felt, the sheer humiliation. It was a victory, but a hollow one. I had exposed his truth, but it came at the cost of my own public humiliation. The whole town would now know that my own son had abandoned me when I was sick. I was an artist, a success, but I was also a spectacle, a subject of pity and gossip. The moral victory felt a lot less triumphant when it was paraded around for everyone to see. My first inkling of the national attention came from my next-door neighbor, Martha. She came over with a copy of the New York Times in her hand, her face a mixture of shock and glee. "Virginia, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice a breathless whisper. "You're on the front page." I took the paper from her trembling hands, and there it was, my painting in all its brutal, unforgiving honesty. The headline read, "A Mother's Masterpiece, Art as an Act of Betrayal." The article, written by a prominent art critic, described the painting as a stunning, visceral commentary on the breakdown of family values in the modern age. He wrote about the emotional power of the piece, the way it transcended mere art to become a powerful social statement. But what really caught my eye was the last paragraph. It mentioned my illness,
my son's public success, and his abandonment of me. The article painted Thomas as the antagonist, the embodiment of a generation that had lost its way, a generation that valued money and status over family and love. It was brutal, and it was true. My heart pounded in my chest. I had wanted to expose him, to shame him, but I had never expected it to be so public, so widespread. I felt a pang of guilt, a fleeting moment of regret. Was this what I wanted? To ruin my son's reputation? To air our dirty laundry for the whole world to see? The answer, a bitter and twisted one, was yes. He had chosen to abandon me when I needed him most. He had chosen to see me as a burden, not as his mother. He had chosen his ambition over me. And now he was paying the price. My art was no longer just a personal triumph. It was a public spectacle, a lesson for all to see. The phone started ringing again, but this time it wasn't just friends and neighbors. It was reporters from every major newspaper and magazine in the country. They all wanted a piece of me, a piece of the story. They wanted to know about my life, my illness, my son. I gave them what they wanted. I told them everything. From the moment I found out about my diagnosis to the moment Thomas abandoned me, I didn't hold back. I told him about his cold, transactional phone calls, about the check he had sent me, about his attempt to use my art to climb the corporate ladder. I was a storyteller, and my story was raw, honest, and compelling. I was not just an artist. I was a voice for every mother who had ever been abandoned, every parent who had ever been forgotten. My anger, my grief, and my defiance were on full display, and the world was listening. I had a platform now, a powerful platform, and I was going to use it. I was going to turn my pain into purpose, my sorrow into strength. And my son, he had no idea what was coming next. The battle was no longer just between a mother and her son. It was between two generations, two value systems, two very different ideas of what it meant to be a family. I thought the media attention would be the end of it, a short-lived scandal that would eventually fade away. But it was only the beginning. My story resonated with so many people, and what they did next, it was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. My son thought he could control the narrative, but he had no idea that a far more powerful force was about to enter the picture.
The media frenzy was only the beginning. It wasn't just newspapers and magazines. It was radio shows, television news, and most powerfully of all, the newly emerging social media platforms. My story, my painting, my defiance, it resonated with something deep inside the American psyche. People saw me not just as a sick woman, but as a symbol of a forgotten generation. A generation that had built this country and was now being cast aside by its own children. A national movement, a grassroots campaign started to form. People were sharing my story, creating Justice for Virginia hashtags, and organizing protests. They were furious at the betrayal they saw not just in my story, but in their own lives. They wrote me letters, hundreds of them, from every state in the country. They shared their own stories of sons and daughters who had forgotten them, who were too busy with their own lives to call, to visit, to care. My private pain had become a public anthem. Thomas and his family were suddenly under a microscope. His real estate business was plummeting. His clients, many of them older people, were canceling their contracts. They didn't want to do business with a man who had abandoned his own mother. He tried to do damage control. He went on a local news channel, his face pale and strained, and claimed that my painting was a misunderstanding, a creative interpretation of a minor family disagreement. He said he had always loved me and that he was deeply concerned about my health. It was a pathetic performance, a desperate attempt to save his reputation. But it was too late. The public had already decided who the villain was. His words were a hollow echo, a desperate plea for a forgiveness he didn't deserve. He was now known as the prodigal son, not just in our little town, but across the entire country. His wife, Linda, even tried to call me. Her voice was sharp, accusatory. "Virginia, what have you done? You've ruined us. Thomas's career, his life. You've destroyed everything." She sounded like a caricature, a greedy, entitled woman who couldn't understand that some things are more important than money and status. I didn't say anything, just listened to her rant. I felt a sense of pity for her, a fleeting moment of empathy. She was a victim of Thomas's choices, just like me. But she was also a willing participant in my abandonment, a silent accomplice. I gently hung up the phone. The call only solidified my resolve. I had no regrets. Then came the call that changed everything: the White House. They had seen my story, my painting, my movement. They wanted to invite me to a national summit on family values. They wanted me to speak, to tell my story to a national audience. They saw my art not just as a piece of work, but as a political statement, a powerful symbol of a growing societal problem. I was a simple woman from a small town in Ohio, a woman who had spent her life darning socks and making apple pie. And now I was a national figure. My life was a testament to the power of a single person to change the world, to turn a private tragedy into a public triumph. I was no longer a victim. I was a warrior. I was getting ready to head to Washington. The town was buzzing. I was on my way to speak about the importance of family, of love, of compassion, and I was going to do it all for the boy who had abandoned me. But what happened at that summit? What he did when he saw me on that stage? It was the most shocking moment of all. The final culmination is right here. You have to see it to believe it.
The morning of the summit was a whirlwind of activity. A large limousine, a sleek black car that looked so out of place in my small-town driveway, was there to pick me up. I was dressed in a beautiful blue dress I had bought for the occasion, my hair styled by a professional who had flown in just for me. I felt like a movie star, a political figure, a person of importance. It was a strange feeling, a far cry from the woman who had sat in her shed painting in silence. As the car pulled away, I caught sight of Martha, waving at me from her porch, her face a mixture of pride and awe. I smiled and waved back, a silent thank you for her support. The summit was held in a massive auditorium in Washington, D.C., a place filled with senators, governors, and other important people. I was a fish out of water, a simple woman in a world of power and politics. But as I walked to the podium, I felt a sense of calm, a quiet confidence. I was not there to talk about politics. I was there to talk about family, about love, about the things that truly matter. I looked out at the sea of faces, and I saw not just politicians and public figures, but people who had their own stories of love and loss, of betrayal and triumph. I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them my story. I told them about my husband, my son, my illness. I told them about my art, about the fury and the love that had fueled me. I told them about the check, about the betrayal, about the painting. I didn't hold back. My voice was strong. My words were clear. I was not just a speaker, I was a storyteller. And my story was raw, honest, and compelling. When I was done, there was a moment of silence, a stunned, quiet moment. And then the room erupted into applause. It was a wave of sound that washed over me, a powerful emotional response that I had never experienced before. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I had done it. I had turned my pain into purpose. Then from the back of the room, a voice, a man's voice. "Mom?" I turned and my heart stopped. It was Thomas. He was standing there, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and something else. Not anger, not humiliation, something I had never seen before. Regret. True, unadulterated regret. The man who had abandoned me when I was sick, the man who had tried to use me for his own gain, was standing there, in the middle of a national summit, and he was looking at me with the eyes of the little boy I had raised. He pushed his way through the crowd, ignoring the glares and the whispers. He came to the stage, to the podium, and he stood in front of me, his hands trembling. "Mom," he said again, his voice cracking, "I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was a fool, a selfish, arrogant fool. I love you, Mom. I'm so sorry." The words were simple, but they were filled with a raw, honest emotion that I had never heard from him before. He wasn't trying to save his reputation. He wasn't trying to win me over. He was just a son, finally, truly asking for his mother's forgiveness. I looked at him and, for the first time in years, I saw my son. Not the man he had become, but the boy he had always been. The boy who had loved me unconditionally. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. I just reached out and took his hand. He was my son, my one and only son, and he was home. I thought my journey was over, that my story was finished. But what happened next was the most shocking and unexpected twist of all. I had no idea that my story would be the beginning of something so much bigger, something that would change not just my life, but the lives of so many others. You have to see it to believe it. What happened next? It was a miracle.
The applause was deafening, a roaring wave of support that washed over the auditorium. Thomas stood before me, still trembling, his face a landscape of emotions I'd never seen from him before. He had been a man of words and calculated actions, but now he was simply my son, broken and vulnerable. He reached out to embrace me, and I did the only thing a mother could do. I opened my arms and held him tight. The audience's applause softened to a gentle, respectful hum. This was no longer a political event. It was a private, deeply personal reunion, a moment of raw human emotion played out on a national stage. Afterward, in the hushed chaos backstage, Thomas clung to me. "I was so wrong, Mom. I was so arrogant," he confessed, his voice thick with tears. "I was so caught up in the chase, in building a life that looked good on paper, that I forgot what a life is. I'm so sorry." He told me about the collapse of his business, the loss of his clients, and the shame he felt. The very public humiliation I had orchestrated had, paradoxically, brought him to his knees and forced him to look at himself for the first time in years. He wasn't just apologizing for the money, he was apologizing for the moral and emotional abandonment, for the betrayal of a lifetime of love. The media, of course, went wild. This story of our public reconciliation became an even bigger sensation than the initial scandal. The New York Times ran another front-page story, this time with a photo of Thomas and me, a simple black and white image of a son holding his mother's hand. The headline read, "The Prodigal Son Returns, a Family Forgiven." Our story was no longer just about the dark side of ambition. It was about the power of redemption, of a mother's love that never wavered. The donations started pouring in, not for me, but for a new foundation, a movement to support aging parents who had been abandoned by their children. The Virginia Lee Foundation was born, and with it, a new purpose for my life. I eventually sold The Prodigal Son to a private collector for a staggering sum, and every penny of it went into the foundation.
I didn't need the money. My art had already given me all the wealth I could ever want. My health was improving, my spirit was strong, and my son was back in my life. The final beautiful twist of fate came a year later when I, now in remission, stood next to Thomas as he signed a contract to lead a new ethical real estate firm, one that specialized in helping older people find homes. He was a changed man, and his business wasn't just about money, it was about doing good. He had found a new kind of success, a success built on integrity, not greed. I look back at that time now, and I see it not as a tragedy, but as a painful, necessary journey. The day my son abandoned me was the day I truly began to live. My illness, my art, my public humiliation, and our eventual reconciliation, it was all a part of a larger plan, a beautiful, unexpected journey that took me from a lonely shed in Harmony, Ohio, to the front page of a newspaper and to a life more full and vibrant than I could have ever imagined. My son might have forgotten me, but the world remembered. And in the end, that was a miracle.